Hello and welcome to another update where we go behind the scenes of shark conservation to see how it works. This episode, or this update, I'm joined by Fisheries Conservation Officer Jack Renwick, and we're going to be looking at the UK and EU negotiations that have happened recently. I'm your host, Mark Stokes-Packer, and this is the Shark Trust Podcast. Jack, thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you for having me back.
We're not going to go into detail about what it is you do, who you are, because we've already done that in the last series. So if you want to know that, go back to series 1, a whole episode of Jack. It's amazing. Definitely check it out. But what you've been doing at the moment, you've been doing the UK and EU negotiations. What is that? How's that working? Like, what is going on there?
So the way that this works at the moment, with the UK having left the EU, now every year the two parties get together and they have a extended set of negotiations to work out what the total allowable catches should be for UK and EU waters. So this is the total amount of fish that can be removed from the ocean through fisheries. There's quite a lot of detail that goes into these negotiations, so it isn't just the total numbers that come out anymore. There's a lot of technical details, additional protections that can be put in place throughout this process. And our role within this is kind of just to engage with both parties as it goes on to ensure that we're advocating for sustainable limits for sharks, skates and rays that are part of this process. So not all of the ones that we cover in here, but there are a few species of interest that are covered within this process. And we need to be there to ensure that sustainable limits for these species are set.
So is this a little bit, because I've just spoken to Ali about ICAT literally in the last episode, and you kind of have to be there at different moments to make sure that evidence and stuff is correct. Is that the same with this one? Or is this one more like they've already got the evidence and it's just them working out random stuff?
So it's not quite the same as ICAT. ICAT is all of the parties meeting together, and obviously we're involved in that process through all of the different fora to get to that annual meeting at the end of that process. This one's slightly different. So whilst we do engage throughout the year, it's much more condensed within this kind of period of the year, so the autumn coming into winter, but it's a similar kind of process but instead of following that science throughout the whole process, we're coming in with more of a kind of advocacy approach, where we still do advocacy in ICAT, but there's also a lot of evidence, and we still use evidence in this forum, but it's slightly different in the way that we engage with it.
Okay. And when you said that there's some species in there that are like of interest, what species are we talking about here?
So the main ones are skates and rays, and that is the big umbrella of skates and rays that are fished or caught, or in some cases not allowed to be caught within UK and EU waters. There's a lot of species that sit within this complex, and it is also very complex in the way that they are managed within this, because there is something called a group TAC, or group total allowable catch. So many other species are managed on their own. So if you look at something like cod or haddock, these species are given one total allowable catch. Maybe there'll be different total allowable catches in different areas, but they are managed as a single species. For quite a few species of skates and rays, they are managed in one big group. So they can set a total for this, and all of the captures of all of these species all add up to that total. There are some that are single species, and we're going to get into how this is changing in a second, I think.
Yeah. And yeah, we're going to go straight into it, because that's a wrap my brain. So we don't usually like things being put in a group, because they could say it's like, these are not the numbers, I'm just coming off the top of my head. Say 1,000 tons you can catch with skates and rays. There could be one of those rays that if you do that to that one species on its own, then they could be, decimated or something like that. But then another one, if you did it, it'd be fine. So how do you make sure that the species within that aren't getting overfished, even though it's under the level of the group, but it might not be under the level of the individual species.
So this is something that has been coming up quite a lot recently, through the last couple of years. In the UK and the EU have been working together through something called the Specialised Committee on Fisheries to work out different methods of trying to figure this out. Because, as you said, what can happen is within this group tag, there's different species that have different life histories, and therefore some of those species are more it's more easy for them to be overfished. They're more they're more vulnerable. They're more susceptible to overexploitation. That's the word I'm looking for. So they're much more susceptible because either they have less young, it takes them longer to reach maturity. There's a lot of different factors that can be in play here. So it means that when they're managed all in a group, you can have some species which can reproduce really quickly, they can replenish themselves, but others that can't. So you're then these species can be way more vulnerable within this group setting. So what has been developed is, and it's just kind of been put in place this year, is looking at taking the most vulnerable species in this complex and removing them, and then giving them a single species total allowable catch. Now, there's some kind of legal procedures, which means you can't fully separate it out of this group tag. So what the UK and EU have decided is to call them of which species. So when these aren't the real numbers, but if it is 1,000 tons of skates and rays in one area, 20 of these tons could be a single species. So this does give these more vulnerable species in this complex a little bit more protection.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds a bit better than what it was before. And then what are the shark species as well? Are there shark species involved? So
there's one shark species that's managed in this way, and that's Spurdog. It's one of our species that we've been working on for quite a while. The stock was massively overfished previously and became a zero TAC and then a prohibited species. And then in 2023, the fishery reopened after over a decade of strict management measures to get it to a point of tentative recovery. And when this fishery reopened, the total allowable catch was set higher than we would have liked. But one of the management measures that came in place with this was a 100 centimeter maximum size. Okay. So that means that if you're a fisher and you catch a spurdog that is over 100 centimeters, you have to return it back to the sea. And we're still gathering the data on how likely they are to survive this process, but we think they could be more likely to survive than some other species, so it is beneficial to return them because they have a chance of continuing to, thrive and reproduce and add more spurdog to the population to continue the trend of recovery.
Is that why they put the max size, because they want the larger ones that are still sexual maturity, so they can keep populating? Yeah, the aim of that.
So the evidence showed that larger females produce more young, so it's beneficial to have more large females in the population for recovery. Yeah. So this year, in the negotiations, there's been some changes to how spurdog's been managed. So firstly, the total allowable catch has been reduced, so it's been set at 54 point something percent of what ICES has advised that the catch should be. So ICES are the body that takes scientific data and then gives advice to the UK, the EU, and other parties of what the best available data says that fishing limits should be. So the parties decided to take this number and only set the total allowable catch at 54% of this, which is great. That's a really good step, and it's been something that we've been advocating for since this fishery reopened. However, within this, the 100 centimeter maximum size is going to be removed in going to 2026.
So there's not going to be a size at all, or as in they're reducing the size? Or
so there's some text in the agreement between the UK and the EU that says that a minimum size will be explored. So it's the opposite. So if a fish is below this size, you have to return it back to the sea. So whilst this means that those larger females are now able to be fished, their idea is that the younger ones can be protected to the point where they are able to have at least reproduced before they are caught.
Okay.
However, there is no minimum size that has been set, and the commitment is to explore one. So we're not sure when we would see this come into place, if it does come into place.
Okay. So the maximum size, you want the larger females so that they would be able to have more young, rebuild the population, and that's now been taken away, and you're having the younger size.
Well, that has
Potentially.
a potentially, yeah.
Yeah, potentially have the younger size.
Yeah.
But then the larger females being caught. So
The
like a
idea
lag
is that
somewhere?
it's a trade-off between because the total that can be caught has been brought down massively.
yeah,
So this is a trade-off
okay.
to be able to then catch the larger ones. So we are definitely advocating for a minimum size to be put in place, and we'll continue advocating for this over the next year before the negotiations for fishing for 2027. And we've got many channels that we can work in to try and get this put into place.
Okay. And when so these ended last Friday? Was it Friday?
The negotiation?
Yeah.
Yeah, last week. Well, the negotiations ended a bit before, but this was released. The outcomes were released last week.
Yeah. And so when will they actually come into effect?
So they're going to effect at the beginning of 2026.
Beginning of 2026. Yeah. And so it's kind of positive news for Spurdog, but also we want to get that minimum.
So I would say that overall it's mixed. So we're happy with the single species, the of which tax that have been put in place for skates and rays. So that those species that are actually covered, because we should probably mention the specific species. So that's shagreen, sandy ray, and small-eyed ray are getting of which tax within the larger group tax. Those are getting that in the western area, which is kind of the Western English Channel and out up round to Scotland, and then in the eastern area, which is just the Eastern English Channel, small-eyed ray are getting an of which tag. So that's good news. We're happy about that. On the Spurdog front, where it's also mixed. We're happy about the tack reduction. But we're not happy about the removal of the 100 centimeter maximum size without a appropriate minimum size being put in place.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so with those changes, what is it next that we're going to be doing, or specifically, what is it next that you're going to be doing?
So there's a lot going on in kind of UK for shark skates and rays at a UK and EU level at the moment. A lot coming out last week and this week. So there's a lot more to do going into 2026. We've got the fisheries management plans to look into. So the fisheries management plan for skates and rays in the Southern North Sea and English Channel has just been released. So that's something that we'll be analysing and figuring out how best we can work within that framework. And then we'll be using that and our other methods for advocacy to continue to ensure that sustainable limits are put in place for shark skates and rays within UK and EU waters. So it's a lot of talking to the government, making sure that our data, or the data that we can find, is we can make it applicable and really try and push it through the channels that we need to secure these protections or whatever kind of management is required for the species that need it.
Quick question on the fisheries management plans.
Yeah.
Is that just UK, or is that UK and EU as well?
So that's very ends up being quite complex. But it's a UK plan, but for species like skates and rays, because they are managed jointly between the UK and the EU. Whatever the UK decides to do within these plans will probably need some kind of EU input to be able to figure out how it's all going to work in practice.
Okay. Wow. Well, busy time for
Very
the new
busy
year.
time, yeah.
We're going to go off for Christmas now.
Yeah.
But nice busy first week back.
Yeah, gonna have to hit the ground running when we get back.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully you found that update very useful and interesting. And I'm sure we're going to have plenty more updates in 2026. Hopefully nice and positive. So yeah, thank you for listening. Definitely tune in for series 2. I promise it is genuinely coming. I know I've been saying it for a year, but it is coming. And yeah, also thank you to our sponsors, Surf Ears, who sponsor this series of the podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Surf Ears, the earplugs that let sound in but keep water out. Perfect for diving, surfing or snorkeling. Surf Ears 4.0 feature a re-engineered fused core and mesh design, paired with tough silicone rubber, making them more durable than ever. They're designed with sustainability in mind, using materials like ocean plastic and recycled silicone. We've tried them and honestly, they're a game changer. Comfortable, eco-conscious, and they actually work. Thank you Surf Ears for sponsoring this episode and keeping our ears happy and healthy.